So what we're doing now is we're going to be doing what's called a 6X emerger. I picked this up because it's really a simple fly with a couple of real interesting pieces to it. Came out of Blue Ribbon. It's kind of a PMD nymph, or almost an all-purpose nymph. And the part that made it, to me, really interesting is what they're using for the body, which is golden pheasant tail, as opposed to regular pheasant tail or some of the other materials we've used for nymphs. And I thought it kind of gives it a very interesting look to the fly. You can see it in the photograph. And I brought in some cuts of stuff. You tie it just like you'd be using standard ring neck pheasant tail. You do nothing different with it. So it's a really simple product. The other two items that are part of it is you have a wing case of dun Zealand, okay, and thorax of peacock. That's it. It's a super simple fly. Kind of nice, got a very nice little look to it. It's kind of an emerger type, if you would, because of the Zealand wing and not as a shuck. So it's actually more a wing than a shuck. So again, what I'm trying to do here is not just tie flies and teach you a particular fly, but show you how to tie using different materials and different styles so that you can turn around and use these for doing it. Once you learn a technique, you know, and I tell people the difference between an Adams and a light Cahill is the color. You tie them exactly alike. So if you can tie one, you can tie the other. You know, any standard dry fly, they're all tied the same. Tail, body, wing, hackle. Boom. Do one, change colors, you can do them all. So my point here is in this session we're going to talk about superfly. I'm doing this one first to kind of get everybody a whirl. Then we're going to go on to that the dry fly, and this is the nymph. It's the same as in the photograph. It's super simple. I'm using a 3761, which is a 1 extra heavy standard shank nymph hook. So it's a heavier hook. It's not a dry fly hook. It's meant to sink. There's no bead on this. You probably could put a bead. I don't know. It's up to you about the beads. You don't need a lot of special materials with this. It's, like I said, golden pheasant tail, Zealand, peacock. That's it. You can knock these out and lose them all you want. The other thing that's interesting, it's a mayfly nymph, but you notice there's no tail. Don't know why Matthews didn't put a tail on it, but he didn't. It just doesn't have a tail. So it could be it. So let me go off and do one for you. We're using 8/0 uni-thread caramel. Nothing special. You could probably use just about any brown thread because you're imitating a brownish color nymph, so I would presume you'd want to have your thread, at least I would like to have my thread the same. Start my thread at about the 2/3 location, bring my thread back to the bend of the hook. I'm going to grab a few fibers of the golden pheasant tail. You don't need very many because you're just wrapping a body. What I'm going to do is I'm going to clip the tip a little bit just so that it's not too fragile. I'm also going to try and get that tail about the same length as the body, and the reason for that is I'm trying to keep my body pretty constant in diameter. Now here I like to use my fingers. This is where you can use your packle pliers if you'd like, but it's nothing more than wrapping like you would wrap pheasant tail. And it gives this very interesting coloration and look. Kind of a very nicely modeled look to the fly. And the golden pheasant tail feather is actually a brown. That's not black, by the way. You're actually looking at a darker brown and a lighter brown within the coloration of the golden pheasant tail. Tie that down. Clip the excess. Zealand. Just, this happens to be Bet Zealand, just a chunk of Zealand. How thick depends upon how thick you want the wing. You can either use a hose piece, okay, which is slightly thicker. If you want a thinner wing, you would simply just remove some of the fibers. I'll take some of them off of here just because. And we'll thin that wing down just a little bit. We're going to tie that in right on top, bring my thread back to where my body ended. At this point I also like to clip my wing, which I clip even with the point. Gives me a nice little wing stubble. Okay? The last but not least is a single piece of peacock. I'm more worried about the thicker stem back here for some strength, so I'm going to get rid of the very tip. Tie it in. And then just wrap our peacock with touching turns like you would be doing dry fly hackle. It gives it a nice, full, and a very movable piece of peacock.
Whose pattern is this?
This came from Blue Ribbon Fly, so I'm presuming it's either Jurassic or Matthews. I'm not sure who did it, but it was one or the other. Okay? Tie in your peacock, do a whip finish. And the fly is done. Now, just as a reminder, everybody, I want you to notice, here's my tarking thread. See what direction I'm pulling my thread in? Pulling my thread that way. It's busted, but that's okay. The reason for that is if you pull straight down on your thread when you're doing your whip finish, before the torque can get to the very last turns, which is going to lock in the very end of it, you're actually loosening those first couple of turns. People complain about their whip finishes coming off, and so they do belt suspenders and rope by putting 2 whip finishes on, and that's because they don't make one good whip finish. Don't pull your thread straight down when you're putting the torque. Pull your thread parallel as it was being wrapped, and that'll put the torque. The torque will go from the first wrap and will work its way back to the last wrap, which will then grab everything. Okay, that's really the key.